Chapter 22. Parker. Parker followed Garrett to his hotel room. He had left Adriana in the care of some of the Ramesly ladies downstairs. While Parker felt a twinge of conscience for leaving her directly after the bombing incident, he needed to get to the bottom of what was going on with Garrett and the drug that he had stolen from Mercy Hospital's drug dispensary. As soon as his cousin swiped the door keycard, Parker put a hand on the door. "We need to talk." "I'm tired, Parker, and I have had enough of a lecture from Gabe," an irritated Garrett said. "This could wait until you come back from your honeymoon." "You have been avoiding me for almost a month now," quietly asserted Parker. "We could just have this conversation and get it done with." "Fine," ground out Garrett. He led the way into the room. He stopped by the kitchenette, taking a half-empty bottle out of the cupboard. "Drink?" "No," declined Parker. He folded his arms as he watched Garrett pour himself a glass. "You were in our hospital. We have video of you taking a medication out of the dispensary at Mercy." "One of the doctors thought I was Gabe. It happens on occasion. We look enough alike," shrugged Garrett as he had a sip. "Maybe the doctor was new or something. The place was chaos. I guess there had been a big accident on the freeway, and most of those who were hurt were coming into Mercy. I asked for the code. I brought them what I thought was the right thing. The nurse said I screwed up and she would take it back. I was trying to help." Parker digested Garrett's words. "Why were you at the hospital?" "Scans," a disgusted Garrett said. "More and more scans for my back. The doctor never does anything with them, just piles on the charges and fees." "Then why not just say so?" questioned Parker with a sigh. It was easy enough to follow up to find out if Garrett had been in to see his doctor on the day the theft occurred. It had been his hope this was the case. However, it didn't explain why Garrett had been refusing to speak to him or Gabe. Why keep avoiding us and making it seem even worse? Garrett gave Parker a level look before downing the rest of the alcohol. "First, because you guys are family. You should trust me. Second, I've been avoiding giving you this." Parker frowned as Garrett picked a letter up from the top of a dresser and held it out to him. He slowly took it from Garrett's outstretched hand. "What is it?" "A letter from Uncle James. I tried to talk your father out of it," grimaced Garrett. "Kind of how I tried to talk Nate out of his plan to just leave everything to Nick. Now I have to tell Cora that I need to liquidate all the large assets, including her home, to put them in a trust fund for her first son. Nate left her and Oliver with nothing." "Are you serious?" Parker paused from unfolding the letter, looking at Garrett in shock. "I wish I wasn't," stated Garrett. He poured himself another drink. "All I have is bad news lately. I had hoped to purchase Cora's home and vehicle, putting them in her name without her knowledge, set aside some funds for her and Oliver. But with the way the FBI is killing Ramesly hotels, I can't afford to. I just put my own home on the market so I can downsize and use the funds in the interim for expenses with the business. I have to talk to Henry, but we need to start laying off people too. Not something a luxury brand of hotels generally does. It's going to hurt our reputation, our shares, and make things harder." "Why can't Cora use the money that is in trust for Nick?" wondered Parker. "Why would Nate do that?" "Nate thought Cora was going to leave him," confided Garrett with a bitter laugh. "He wasn't too disposed to treat her well. He also wondered if Oliver was even his son. He was convinced she was having an affair. Nate made sure the trust can't be accessed until Nick is 21. The lawyers have made it airtight, and fighting it in court would just spend more money I don't have. It's a mess." Parker opened his own letter and scanned it. For a moment, the breath was knocked out of him as he read. Sure enough, James's scrawl was attached to the bottom. "He can't do this." "He did," confirmed Garrett. He poured a new glass and offered it to Parker, who declined it with a dazed shake of his head. "Uncle James reneged on your deal. I guess having Gabe and Marshall turn him down made him feel that none of you were worth being in charge of the family business. He blackmailed me to carry the letter and keep it hushed until after your wedding. It's cruel of him." "Blackmailed you?" A stunned Parker asked, "With what?" Garrett shook his head. "I'm not about to say. This isn't something I'm proud of, nor do I want it getting around. How Uncle James knew, I have no idea, but it seems to be a trend in our families." "I can't believe this," murmured Parker, rereading the letter. "Congratulations, you got married for absolutely no reason." Garrett tipped a glass to Parker in a mock toast before sipping from it. "Uncle James just wrote you out of the family business. You and I both know why, even if no one else will say it out loud." "I need to speak to him," a determined Parker stated, ignoring the fact that Garrett knew his secret. It was a bit of a surprise, but Parker didn't have time to pursue it. Maybe Garrett had read the letter. He certainly seemed to know what it was about. Parker folded the paper, putting it in the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. "I'm going to straighten this out. I did everything he asked." "Best of luck," wished Garrett. Parker exited the room, intent on going straight to his father to get some answers. He willed the elevators to hurry as he pulled out his phone. Dialing James, Parker entered the elevator, thankful he was alone. There was no answer. Deciding not to leave a message, Parker was surprised when the phone suddenly rang in his hand. It was his mother. Frowning, Parker answered the call. "Hello?" "Oh, Parker," sobbed Dottie. "I tried calling Gabe, but he didn't pick up." "Mom, are you okay? What's going on?" a concerned Parker asked. "It's your father. The nurse called and said he's gone to the hospital," a tearful Dottie explained. "He overdosed on his medications." The elevator doors opened. Absently, Parker stepped out and to the side so he wouldn't be in the way of a group of people who needed to use the elevator. It was busy in the lobby with guests returning to the hotel. For a moment, Parker didn't know what to say. "The doctors did all they could, but he's gone," sniffed Dottie. "I'm at the hospital. I don't know what to do." "I will be there as soon as I can," Parker said woodenly. "Thank goodness," a relieved Dottie replied. Parker said his goodbye, putting the phone away. Where he had felt anger just moments before, felt hollow. The old man was dead. Parker would never get his answers. He had lost his father without really ever having him. Across the lobby he could see Adriana talking to Anne, his wife, whom he had not needed to marry. The letter, burning a hole in his suit pocket, reminded him that James had decided to disinherit Parker. James had taken away the condo, the job, the salary, everything he had been promised if Parker had continued to do as James had bargained for. It said how James couldn't stomach Oscar's illegitimate son taking the helm of RHMC. It was all for nothing. Adriana spotted him, a smile lighting her face. Parker swallowed hard, taking unsteady steps toward her. Sensing his mood, her smile faded to a look of confusion. "Parker?" "My father died." Whatever Parker had thought he might say, it wasn't that bald statement. He felt like he was without an anchor. Ruefully, Parker realized this was probably what Gabe had felt when he lost his position and Brittany. He could now fully sympathize with his brother. Adriana's concerned eyes met his before she stepped forward, hugging him. It was the first time she had initiated contact with him. Parker slowly brought his arms up, holding her and breathing in her clean and simple scent. His reasons for marrying her needed to change, realized Parker. He had lost his inheritance. Simple altruism wasn't enough. The thought of sending her, her sisters, and her mother back wasn't tenable. There could be a child already. They had not used protection. There had been no need since the goal was to have Adriana become pregnant. No, he wasn't sending her back, reflected Parker. Not when there was any chance she could be pregnant. He would do his best to be a better father than James or Oscar. Parker guessed it meant he intended to keep the marriage. 5 days, and this slip of a woman had him firmly bound to her. Maybe she would be his anchor. Maybe that was all he really needed. "Is there anything we can do?" Anne was asking. "No," rasped Parker. "I need to get to the hospital to be with Mom." "Do Marshall and Gabe know?" questioned Anne. As Parker shook his head, she continued, "I can let them know. I will get the desk to call you a car as well." Anne went to the lobby desk to organize the car service. "Can I come with you?" Adriana asked. "To the hospital?" Parker's arms tightened around her for a moment. "Yes." "Then we should both get our coats," she murmured against him. "It's cold outside." Parker nodded numbly. Reluctantly, he slowly let go of her, and was pleasantly surprised when Adriana kept hold of his hand. Adriana told Anne they were going to retrieve their coats and would return. Parker let her take charge. It was curious to see this timid woman lead him through the hotel. Part of him reflected he liked that she was taking care of him. At their suite, Adriana grabbed the necessary garments, and they returned to the lobby, still holding hands. The car service came, and Parker held the door open for his wife. His wife. He wasn't going to let James taint his marriage, Parker decided. It didn't matter how the marriage had come about. It mattered what he and Adriana chose to do. He had made vows which he had every intention of keeping. Once inside the back of the car, she took his hand again. "My father died when I was young. Iona was just a baby," she confided. "He read books to me. Did your father read books to you?" "No," curtly replied Parker. James had never spent time willingly with Parker. For a moment he felt the old anger build. Then he realized Adriana had fallen silent. She had tried to distract him, make conversation, and he had cut her off. Parker glanced at her. Adriana was biting her bottom lip and looking at the road ahead. "I would read books with you and our children," quietly promised Parker. Adriana immediately looked at him, rewarding him with a smile. "I would like that." No, Parker vowed. James wasn't going to taint this fragile marriage. He wasn't in it for James's rules or manipulations anymore. Parker was married because he wanted to be, he decided. He gave Adriana's hand a squeeze. "Do you swim?" "Yes," answered Adriana, a little confused by the change of subject. "It has been a long time, not since I was a little girl." "Have you ever seen the ocean?" questioned Parker. Adriana shook her head. "Only through the glass of the airplane. Have you?" Parker had a smile. "I'm going to take you to see the ocean. Maybe even see if you can balance on a surfboard." "A surfboard?" echoed Adriana, frowning over the word. Parker tried to explain as they continued through the traffic. "You do this for fun?" she asked in disbelief. "You're not worried about sharks?" "No, I'm not worried about the sharks," replied Parker. "Then I will try the surfing of yours," decided Adriana. Any further attempt at conversation was lost as the car pulled up to the hospital entrance. Parker helped Adriana from the car. He continued to hold her hand as they made their way to the desk and inquired about the room number for James Ramesly. Even though James was now deceased, Dottie would either be in the room with him or in a nearby private waiting area. Parker knew the layout of Mercy, easily navigating the maze of corridors. His office was on the 5th floor. Correction, his former office. He supposed he would have to collect his things to make room for the person who would take his place. He wondered briefly who it might be, then decided it didn't matter. After a brief conversation with the nurse's desk, they found Dottie in the nearby waiting room. A nurse who had been comforting her vacated the room after they entered. Parker sat next to his mother, with Adriana sitting next to him. "Oh, Parker," sniffled Dottie, pressing a wet tissue to her eye as she grieved. He wrapped an arm around her, letting her lean on him as fresh waves of tears came. Parker didn't try to break the silence, letting Dottie cry on him instead. Minutes later, Marshall and Gabe came into the room. Seeing her sons, Dottie came forward, giving first Gabe a hug, then sobbing on Marshall. It was always this way. Gabe was favored by their father, while Marshall was favored by their mother. Parker tried to push the resentment away. It was just the way life had always been. He should be over the rejection by now. Adriana added her second hand to their clasped ones, leaning closer to him, and suddenly he was fiercely glad she was there. "Have you gone to see him?" quietly asked Gabe. "No." Parker shook his head. "I've been here with Mom." Gabe took the empty seat beside Parker as Marshall tried to comfort Dottie. "How did this happen?" frowned Gabe as he talked softly so Dottie wouldn't overhear their conversation. "He seemed well enough at the wedding." "Mom said something about an overdose on the phone. I think his nurse told her that," quietly mentioned Parker. James had a part-time nurse who helped look after his medications during the last few weeks. It was someone Parker had personally vetted for the position. "Intentional?" whispered Gabe in disbelief. "I know he wasn't looking forward to prison, but he was the one who made the deal, who turned himself in." "I don't know," shrugged Parker. "Maybe it was accidental." "I hope so," breathed Gabe. "This is a mess." Parker nodded. "With any overdose, there will be an investigation. With the FBI involved, it might drag out a bit." "With Kepler, it will drag out as long as he can make it," darkly said Gabe. "True," agreed Parker. He played with Adriana's hands between both of his. "How are you holding up?" Gabe paused before dragging in a breath. "I really haven't had time to process it. You?" "Not sure." Parker felt the letter in his pocket mocking him. He debated telling Gabe, but decided it wasn't the right time. It was better done in private. Plus, Parker needed time to think. The consequences of what the letter stated had barely begun to sink in, and he needed to process the situation James had put him in. Parker and Gabe looked up as a doctor came into the room, discreetly closing the door behind him. Parker recognized him as Dr. Ned Barnes. He was a long-standing member of the hospital. "Mrs. Ramesly," he greeted Dottie. "If you don't mind, I would like to speak to Mr. Gabe Ramesly and Mr. Parker Ramesly." "You can use my office down the hall," offered Marshall, rubbing Dottie's back as she continued to weep softly on him. As a practicing physician, he had an office on the floor. Marshall had not fully moved out of it, so they could be afforded some privacy by using it. Marshall had expected to give Jasmine a tour of his hospital, grab the last of his things. Then they were scheduled to go on their honeymoon. Not that anyone had their passports anymore, thanks to Agent Kepler. "Thanks, Marshall." Gabe stood, heading for the door. Parker looked to Adriana as he reluctantly let go of her hand. "I'll be back as soon as I can." She nodded, and he followed Gabe. It didn't take long for them to be in Marshall's office. There were a few boxes, half filled with items, on Marshall's desk. Parker shut the door after them so they could have some privacy. "I didn't want to speak in front of Mrs. Ramesly," began Dr. Barnes. At Gabe's nod, he continued, "I'm very sorry to tell you. We believe it was a drug overdose." "Mom already knows," quietly stated Parker. "She told me over the phone." Barnes sighed. "I had hoped to keep it quiet. I told the staff not to disclose the information to her." "Perhaps she overheard it accidentally," suggested Gabe. "Is there something more you wanted to tell us?" "There is bruising along his forearms and the back of the neck," disclosed Barnes. He held up a hand. "It doesn't necessarily indicate anything. The bruising on his left forearm could easily have come from the intravenous line from his last episode a few days ago where he was dehydrated." "Mom didn't say anything about that," frowned Parker. "James didn't want anyone to know he had been in the hospital overnight," explained Barnes. "He was touchy about things like that." "No kidding," sighed Gabe. "What about the other bruising? What does it mean?" "The neck could be the nurse or your mother helping him sit up. James had become delicate, and he bruised more easily in the past few months with the medications he was on. His arm could be from a fall," Barnes reluctantly continued. "However, they could also be indications of foul play." Are you saying he could have been forced to take the pills? Gabe choked on the words, bringing a hand to his mouth. It's possible, sighed Barnes. Nothing can be said definitively until an autopsy is performed. The police investigate every suspected overdose we have. I just thought you should know. Thank you, responded Parker. He wondered just how much Barnes knew about the FBI investigations into the Ramesly family and businesses. Parker was certain there were rumors circulating the hospital. Then again, it wasn't his hospital anymore. James had taken all of it away. We appreciate your help. Parker quickly brought the discussion to a close. Gabe was distressed, and he wanted to protect his brother. Thank you. Of course. If there's anything else I can do, please let me know, Barnes offered before he let himself out of the office, closing the door behind him. This is just too much, muttered Gabe before he took a seat in Marshall's chair. He buried his head in his hands. You heard Barnes. It's all inconclusive at this time, Parker said as he stood. He started pacing the small office. We won't know anything for certain until after an autopsy. Uncle David was murdered, stated Gabe. Do you really think this is just a coincidence with Dad? I don't know what to think, muttered Parker. What if Garrett took the cardioplegia drug to kill Uncle David? What if he did something to our father? Questioned Gabe. For what purpose? Asked Parker a little sharply. I already talked to Garrett about the cardioplegia concoction. He was at the hospital. Someone mistook him for you, asked him to get it for them. There was a mass casualty event, and he thought he was helping. He even said he got the wrong stuff by accident. Is there any way to verify that? Wondered Gabe. Why should we have to? Parker grimaced. He's our cousin. I believe what Garrett told me. Suddenly, the letter in his pocket seemed even more poisonous than before. If he had shown the letter to Gabe, would his brother be jumping to the conclusion that maybe Parker had a hand in James's death? Surely not. Gabe knew Parker better than that. At least, Parker hoped he did. Parker stopped pacing. What would FBI agent Kepler think of the letter? For a moment, Parker was tempted to burn it. However, Garrett knew exactly what it contained, and no doubt James's lawyers would have a copy on hand as well. Besides, no one in the family would believe Parker if he suddenly stepped down from his position of his own violation. Everyone knew how much Parker enjoyed his job. Well, he had been with his family and Adriana the entire day. He had an airtight alibi. I don't know what to do. Gabe rubbed a hand over his face. We don't do anything, decided Parker, not until there are conclusive findings from the autopsy. Gabe sighed and slowly nodded. They both sat in silence, each lost in their own musings. The letter continued to weigh down Parker's pocket, and he ruefully thought about how the secrets just kept piling higher and deeper. If you enjoyed this chapter of The Wedding, Book 10 of the Ramesly Brothers series, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you hit the little bell, you'll be notified every time a new chapter drops. Take care and happy listening.